Hey everyone. So a few days ago I did a video of 10 players who played really well in the playoffs and had a great postseasons. Um, Now it's time to look on the other end of the spectrum and players who did not have good postseasons, who severely underperformed and were largely disappointing these playoffs. So we're going to start out with a couple of goalies and then go into regular skaters. And there's certainly some names that you would expect on this list, I would think, and probably not too many that you wouldn't, given the way that this postseason unfolded. Number one, right off the bat, Brian Elliott, Philadelphia Flyers goaltender. He was awful. Absolutely awful. Now, goaltending has been an issue for the Flyers for it seems like forever. Um, but certainly over the last 20 years or so, goaltending and finding a franchise goaltender has been impossible for the Philadelphia Flyers. They brought in Brian Elliott, who is already a aging goaltender. He had a very poor playoff 2 seasons ago with Calgary. They brought him in hoping that maybe he could be the answer somehow, and he was not. He was okay during the regular season, not great, but he was okay. But when it came to the playoffs time, he absolutely puked all over himself. In the first round series against Pittsburgh, he played 4 games. Note that was a 6-game series. So he only actually played 4 of them. He went 1-3 with an 8.56 save percentage. Gross. And goals against of almost 5 at 4.74. Pittsburgh ate Elliott alive. And really scored at will on him. He looked absolutely terrible. And just a complete disaster of a postseason for Brian Elliott and the Philadelphia Flyers, who somehow won 2 games against Pittsburgh without any real goaltending from any of their goaltenders. Um, Philly could have contended if they had a goaltender. If Philly could find a way to keep the puck out of their own net, they could have been in the conference finals or maybe even further, given the way that their offense and some of their other players performed in these playoffs, especially Sean Couturier. But keeping the puck out just didn't happen, and it was a disaster for Elliott and the Flyers. Another goaltender from Nashville, Pekka Rinne. Pekka Rinne was disappointing in these playoffs. He was not good. Nashville was a team that, before the season even started, was a heavy cup favorite. They were a heavy cup favorite when the playoffs started, after winning the President's Trophy and being the best team in the regular season. And Pekka Rinne was expected to play at a Stanley Cup level and really lead the team to Stanley Cup glory, or at least to the conference final. Well, that didn't happen. They got ousted in the second round by Winnipeg. Rinne played 13 games. He only had a 7-6 record. His save percentage was barely above 900 at 903, and his goals against was over 3, which is completely unacceptable in this day and age in the modern NHL. 307 is a terrible goals against average. Rinne is somebody who you want their goals against. He should have a 920 save percentage and a 2.25 goals against average. That is the Stanley Cup level that Pekka Rinne should be playing at in the postseason. He obviously wasn't anywhere near that this year, and that's why Nashville got ousted in the second round. And it was a very disappointing exit for Nashville and for Pekka Rinne. Next up, from the Vegas Golden Knights, James Neal. This is a guy that's been talked about a lot for his poor postseason performance. Now, Neal wasn't terrible, and he certainly wasn't as bad as some of the rest of the guys on this list. He was not terrible. In 20 games, he did have 11 points. He scored 6 goals, and he wasn't even a minus player. He had an even rating, so it's not like he was atrocious. But James Neal was one of the offensive leaders for Vegas this year, and he was not that in the playoffs. He disappeared in the finals, completely disappeared, except for when he had a wide open net to shoot at, literally the entire net to shoot at, and he hit the post. and didn't score. That was his biggest, I guess it's a low light, not a highlight, but that was his most noticeable action in the entire Stanley Cup final, was hitting the post on a wide open net. He did not have a great postseason. He wasn't the worst. He wasn't the biggest problem. He wasn't the worst player of the postseason, but it wasn't great. So he was largely disappointing. Next up, from the Boston Bruins, Rick Nash. Rick Nash is a notoriously bad playoff performer. Has been his whole career. But the Bruins brought him into an already very good team, thinking that maybe he could give them enough second line scoring to push them to cup level. He did not. He was largely a disaster for the Bruins since once they brought him in. He got a concussion at the end of the regular season, which made him miss a lot of the end of the regular season with Boston, which he didn't even get to play. And then once he started playing in the playoffs, he wasn't very good. In 12 games played, he had 3 goals, 2 assists for 5 points. And he had a -7 rating. Nash was a huge disappointment in Boston, and I hope to God they do not re-sign him this offseason. He is about the worst kind of player that you could have around these young kids and teaching these young kids in Boston anything. I want nothing to do with Rick Nash. He should go rot away in some bottom-feeding team that will give him stupid money in the offseason since he's a free agent, like a Vancouver or Arizona or something like that. Somewhere where he can score, if he's lucky, 20 goals and 50 points if he's lucky, and collect a $6 million check while he puts up lousy numbers like this. And he won't have to touch playoff hockey ever again. So that's enough of Rick Nash. Obviously, I'm not a very big fan at all. Next, from the Pittsburgh Penguins, Derek Brassard. Derek Brassard was brought into Pittsburgh to be a third-line center. I understand that. Third line, he was a much more offensive player in other places where he's played, whether that's Ottawa, New York, or Columbus. He was expected to score less in Pittsburgh, being a third-line player, but still contribute offensively and help them, have some good depth down the middle. If Derek Brassard is your third-line center, then you should be in really good shape down the middle. Well, Brassard had a lousy regular season in Pittsburgh, and it carried over into the playoffs, where he was not very good in the playoffs at all. In 12 games played, he only had 1 goal, 3 assists for 4 points, and was -1. He was extremely disappointing for the Penguins. They expected a lot more than this out of him. Sure, they didn't expect him to put up Crosby or Malkin-like numbers, but he should have at least had double the points that he had. He should be an 8-point in 12-game kind of player. He was not, and he had a very disappointing postseason to tack on to a very disappointing regular season. Next up, from the Philadelphia Flyers again, Travis Konechny. Travis Konechny was one of the Flyers' best forwards during the regular season. Really developed into a great net front player, a bit of a pest, certainly willing to get under your skin, but also a very good point producer, someone who could score 25-plus goals, somebody who could be in the 50-60 point range. Really, really solid player for Philly, and had a great, great regular season for them. Then came the playoffs. 6 playoff games, he only had 1 goal, no assists for 1 point. It was -3. This is not how top players perform in the playoffs. He had a very rough go of it. Does that mean he's never going to be a good playoff performer? Absolutely not. He's still a very young kid. This was only his second year in the league. But these playoffs were not very good for him, and Philly expected a lot more out of a guy who was playing top 6 minutes than this. So very, very disappointing for Travis Konechny in the playoffs, and hopefully he bounces back and has a better year next year and then a better postseason next year. From the Anaheim Ducks, Corey Perry. Talk about a player who is past his prime. Corey Perry, really, the rest of these are, well, one Anaheim Duck, and the rest of these are all LA Kings. And to save some spots, I really could have just said everybody on the Anaheim Ducks and everybody on the LA Kings. But Perry is a guy who is thought of as a high-level NHL goal scorer. Because really all stemmed from that 1 year where he had 50 goals, and he's carried that reputation for him the rest of the way for some reason, because he really has been declining for a number of years now. But this postseason was just horrendous for him. For a guy who's supposed to be the team's one of their top goal scorers, he put zeros across the board points wise in the 4 games that Anaheim played before they got swept out by San Jose, and he was -5. It was a horrendous postseason for the Ducks in general, but Corey Perry was especially bad. And now 3 LA Kings to end it off. I'll do the last 2 together, but next up, Drew Doughty. Drew Doughty is a premier defenseman in the NHL. Drew Doughty is supposed to be one of the best two-way players in the NHL, meaning he plays really well on his own end, but he can also put up points. He had zeros across the board while Vegas swept the Kings this postseason. And you cannot get zeros in the playoffs from your best player and supposedly one of the top, at least top 4 or 5 defensemen in the entire league. He only played 3 games because he missed one with being suspended, which I still do not think he should have been suspended for. But anyway, he missed a game, so he only played 3 games, but that's still 0 points in 3 games from a premier player and someone who is supposed to be a top producer. Unacceptable. He was +1, so it's not like he was getting ruined in his own end or anything, but not good enough from Drew Doughty, and a major reason why the Kings got swept out. You can't get zeros from this guy on a team already starved for offense. And speaking of starved for offense, I'll do the last 2 together. Tyler Toffoli and Tanner Pearson, both part of the 70s line in LA with Jeff Carter. They're the mains. These guys are main secondary scorers for the LA Kings. LA struggled with scoring all year long, but they were one of the best defensive teams. They really struggled with scoring in the playoffs. They scored they got shut out in 2 of the 4 games against Vegas, and then they scored 3 goals in the other 2 games combined, so only 3 goals in 4 games or something. They were terrible offensively. They were fine defensively. They didn't give up many goals either, but they could not get the puck in the net. And when you think about LA and scoring, immediately you think of Andrei Kopitar, you think of Drew Doughty, you think of Dustin Brown, but you need secondary scoring as well, and that's where guys like Toffoli and Pearson and Carter come in. And Toffoli and Pearson, both in 4 games played, had zeros across the board points-wise and were -1. That means you got 0 secondary scoring from this line. They didn't even play on the same line for the entire series. They were some of the times not. Obviously, once they got down, they shifted lines a lot and tried to find anything offensively. Nothing worked. These guys gave you nothing these playoffs. And goal scoring was the issue for the LA Kings, and it's why they got swept out in the first round. And these 2 are a big reason why. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Not good enough. So, those are 10 guys that had very disappointing playoffs. They are not the only 10 guys in the league who had very disappointing playoffs, but they are certainly 10 who just were not good enough. And so, yeah, thank you for watching. Tell me what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, follow on social media. Check out offthewallhockey.com. Keep this channel growing, spread the word. Up over 200 subscribers now, and I love watching that number climb. And thank you all so much again for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.